I came home from
You promised
deployment
me
expecting
zebras for the
silence,
farm, and instead you
dust,
brought
and the
nothing but
slow comfort of
destruction and
familiarity.
excuses.
What I didn't expect was absence. The ranch gate creaked open the same way it always had, the hinges groaning like an old man waking from sleep. The gravel road stretched ahead of me, winding through mesquite and scrub oak, the Texas sun hanging low and orange in the sky. My truck rolled forward slowly, tires crunching against stone, and for the first time in 14 months, I felt like I could breathe. This land had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it after World War II with money he earned repairing tractors. My father raised cattle here. I grew up fixing fences, riding horses, and learning that land wasn't something you owned. It was something you were responsible for. At the center of the property stood the barn, or at least it was supposed to dot as I crested the final rise. My heart stuttered. I eased off the gas. The space where the barn should have been was empty, scraped earth with tire tracks still visible. I stopped the truck. I stared. I got out and walked closer, boot sinking slightly into the loose soil. The smell hit me first. Fresh dirt, diesel splintered wood. Where the barn once stood was a mound of debris pushed to one side like trash. That barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was hand-built by my father and grandfather together. It stored feed, tools, my horse tack, and letters my dad wrote me when I first deployed. It survived storms, droughts, and decades of hard work, and now it was gone, demolished. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. No missed calls. No voicemails. No warnings, just silence. I walked the perimeter slowly, trying to make sense of it. The foundation was shattered. Beams lay snapped in half. The old American flag my father hung in sidegun. That's when I saw the sign. A white plastic post hammered into the dirt, holding a laminated notice in a clear sleeve. Unauthorized structure, removed by order of the HOA. Sharp and disbelieving. My ranch had existed long before any HOA ever dreamed of forming. But while I was deployed overseas, a developer bought the neighboring land, carved it into neat little parcels, and built a gated community right up against my western fence line. I knew there had been some tension letters forwarded to me months late, vague complaints about visual consistency and property values. I'd ignored them. I assumed common sense would prevail. I was wrong. I drove straight to the HOA office, a freshly built stone building with manicured hedges and a waving community flag. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and entitlement. The receptionist looked up, startled by the dust and grime still clinging to me. "I'm here about my barn," I said calmly. She blinked. "Name." I gave it. Her smile tightened. "Oh, yes. The violation." "Violation." I repeated. She gestured for me to wait and disappeared into the back. A moment later, a woman emerged, mid-50s, perfectly styled hair, pearl necklace, clipboard held like a weapon. "Mr. Carter?" she said crisply. "I'm Linda Prescott, HOA board president." She didn't offer a hand. "You demolished my barn," I said. She nodded once, satisfied. "Correct. It was non-compliant. That barn predates this HOA by 50 years. Nevertheless," she replied, "once your land became adjacent to the community, you were subject to aesthetic standards." I felt my jaw tighten. "You never had permission. We sent notices." "I was deployed?" She shrugged. "Not our concern." I leaned closer. "You destroyed private property." Her eyes hardened. "We improved community value." Something inside me shifted then quietly, irrevocably. "You made a mistake," I said. She smiled thinly. "I assure you, Mr. Carter, everything was done by the book." I walked out without another word. But as I crossed the parking lot, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They thought I was just a rancher. They didn't know who I really was, and they had no idea what they'd just started. Sleep never came that night. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table where my father used to spread out maps and receipts after a long day's work. The house was quiet in a way that felt wrong, to empty, to still. Outside, the wind brushed across the fields, carrying the faint smell of disturbed earth from where my barn used to stand. I kept seeing it in my head. The broken beams, the crushed foundation, the absence. The HOA thought this was over. They thought they'd bulldozed a problem into the dirt and buried it. They had no idea. They just handed me leverage. I pulled out the old metal filing cabinet from the hall closet. The drawers groaned as I slid them open, stuffed with folders my father labeled in his careful handwriting. Deeds, surveys, taxes, permits. I'd always teased him for keeping everything. Now I understood. I spread the papers across the table, organizing them the way I used to organize mission briefings overseas, chronological, color-coded, no room for mistakes. I found photographs of the barn dated decades back, receipts for lumber, county inspection stamps from before the HOA president was even born. At the bottom of one folder was the document I needed most, the original land designation. Agricultural use, historic structure, not subject to residential covenant enforcement. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling something cold and steady settle into my chest. They had no authority. But I needed more than confidence. I needed proof that would survive lawyers, judges, and public scrutiny. At sunrise, I drove into town. The county clerk's office sat in a low brick building that smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. Behind the counter was Rum, man who'd worked there longer than most of the files on the shelves. He squinted at the paperwork as I slid it across the counter. "You're the rancher," he said. He flipped through the documents slowly, his expression shifting from neutral to concerned. "Your property was never annexed into the HOA jurisdiction," he said finally. "Not partially, not conditionally. Never." I nodded. "So they trespassed." Raymond leaned back in his chair. "They demolished a structure on land they don't control. Legally speaking," he didn't hesitate, "that's destruction of private property." The word destruction echoed in my head as I left. From there, I made a call I hadn't expected to make so soon. Marcus answered on the second ring. "I'm home," I said. "Welcome back," he replied. "How bad is it?" "They bulldozed my barn." Silence. "They demolished it," I repeated. "Full removal." When he finally spoke, his voice was different, tight, focused. "Send me everything, right now." By noon, Marcus had reviewed the documents. By evening, he was furious. "They didn't just overstep," he said. "They crossed multiple lines, civil and criminal. Trespass, property destruction, abuse of authority. And that's just the start," I replied, because while digging, I'd found more. HOA enforcement notices sent to addresses they knew were vacant, fines issued without hearings, selective enforcement targeting properties outside their development, environmental runoff redirected into my land without permits. It wasn't incompetence, it was arrogance. Marcus filed an emergency injunction that night. The next morning, county inspectors showed up at the HOA construction site with clipboards and stop work orders. Trucks were turned away. Crews stood around confused. The pristine development froze in place. Mid-expansion. That afternoon, the phone rang. Linda Prescott. Her voice had changed. No edge, no authority, just concern wrapped in fake politeness. Double quotes, "Mr. Carter," she said. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding doesn't involve heavy machinery," I replied. "We acted in good faith." "You acted without jurisdiction?" She paused. "We're prepared to discuss compensation." I looked out the window at the empty space where my barn had been. "This isn't about money." Another pause, longer this time. "We value community harmony," she said. "Carefully. So did my father," I replied. "That didn't stop you from destroying his work." Her voice hardened. "We followed procedure." I couldn't help but smile. "No," I said. "You followed assumption? An assumption isn't law." I hung up by the end of the week. The situation escalated beyond anything the HOA had planned for. The county opened a formal investigation. Environmental agencies flagged violations. Residents began receiving notices, warning of potential legal exposure due to HOA misconduct. The board scrambled. Emergency meetings were called. Emails leaked. Internal messages surfaced showing they knew my land was exempt and chose to act anyway. Marcus forwarded one message to me with a single line. Highlighted, "He's deployed. He won't fight this." I stared at the screen. They hadn't just disrespected my property, they had counted on my absence. That night, I walked the property line as the sun went down, boots crunching against dirt still scarred by bulldozer tracks. I stopped where the barn once stood and pressed my palm into the soil. This land had endured droughts, wars, and generations of hard hands. It wasn't fragile. Neither was I. The HOA had thought power came from titles and committees and printed rules. They were about to learn what real authority looked like, earned, documented, and enforced. And this time, I wasn't going anywhere. Asterisk. The HOA emergency meeting was scheduled for Tuesday night. By Monday afternoon, everyone knew about it. Emails flew through the community like sparks in dry grass. Neighbors who'd never questioned the board before suddenly started asking why county inspectors were on site, why construction had stopped, and why rumors of lawsuits were spreading. Fear has a sound. It's quiet, but it hums. I arrived early, not to intimidate anyone, but because I wanted to see their faces when they realized this wasn't going to disappear. The community center was bright and polished, all glass walls and tasteful wood panels, designed to look transparent while hiding everything that mattered. The room filled fast. Families, retirees, new homeowners who had poured their life savings into the promise of order and protection. They whispered to each other, glancing at the front table where the HOA board sat stiffly. Linda Prescott was there, of course, perfect posture, tight smile, hands folded like she was attending a funeral she didn't expect to be blamed for. Marcus sat beside me, calm and immovable. When the meeting was called to order, Linda cleared her throat. "We're here to address some recent concerns," she began, her voice practiced. "There has been misinformation circulating." A hand shot up. "Why is our expansion shut down?" someone asked. Another voice followed. "Why did we get a county notice about liability?" Linda raised her hands. "One at a time, please." I stood before she could continue. "My name is Daniel Carter," I said, my voice carrying without effort. "I own the ranch bordering your community." The room went silent. Some people recognized the name immediately. Others leaned forward, sensing gravity. "While I was deployed overseas, I continued. Your HOA authorized the demolition of my barn. Murmurs rippled across the room. That structure was on land outside your jurisdiction. I said. It was legally protected, and its destruction was unauthorized. Linda interrupted. Mr. Carter, this isn't the appropriate. Marcus stood. It is exactly the appropriate time, he said calmly. He placed a thick folder on the podium and opened it. County records confirm the HOA has no authority over Mr. Carter's land, Marcus said. The demolition constitutes trespass and destruction of private property. Gasps. A man in the back stood up. Are you saying we're liable? Marcus didn't flinch. Potentially, yes. HOA actions expose the association and, by extension, its members to civil damages. Linda's face drained of color. She tried to regain control. The board acted in good faith. Marcus turned a page and held it up. This is an internal email from the HOA Compliance Committee, he said. It explicitly states the ranch was exempt from enforcement. The room exploded. What? They knew. You lied to us. Linda slammed her gavel. Order. This meeting is adjourned, actually, Marcus said, holding up a stamped document. It isn't. He handed copies to the board members. This is a court-issued injunction, he continued, effective immediately. The HOA is prohibited from enforcing regulations beyond its legal boundaries, issuing fines, or authorizing construction until the investigation concludes. A board member stood abruptly. You can't just, you've already done worse, Marcus replied. That's when the real shift happened. Residents stopped looking at me. They started looking at the board. Questions turned sharp. Accusations flew. People demanded explanations, refunds, resignations. Linda sat frozen. The image she had carefully constructed authority, control, superiority collapsed in real time. One board member quietly removed his nameplate and walked out. Another followed. By the end of the meeting, 3 had resigned. Linda remained. Barely. Outside. The air felt heavier, charged. People gathered in clusters, voices low and urgent. Some apologized to me. Others looked furious, not at me, but at the people who claimed to protect them. Linda approached as the crowd thinned. Her confidence was gone. We can fix this, she said quietly. Rebuild the barn. Pay damages. Let's move forward. I met her eyes. You didn't just destroy a building, I said. You abused power, and now it's public. Her jaw tightened. What do you want? I didn't raise my voice. I want accountability, I said, and I want it on record. The county investigation concluded faster than anyone expected. Violations stacked up. Unauthorized enforcement, improper demolition permits, environmental financial mismanagement. The HOA's insurance refused coverage. The board dissolved itself within 2 weeks. Linda resigned. Last no farewell email. No explanation. Just gone. For the first time since I'd returned home, the land felt quiet again. Not empty. Resolved. But this wasn't the end. Because power doesn't just vanish, it gets transferred. And next, it was time to decide what would rise. Where my barn once stood, rebuilding didn't start with hammers. It started with silence. For the first time since I came home, there were no engines idling near my fence line. No HOA trucks cruising slowly past my gate. No letters taped to posts or plastic warnings flapping in the wind. The land rested, scarred but breathing. Like it finally knew the threat had passed. The county finalized the settlement on a Thursday morning. The terms were precise, unforgiving, public. HOA was required to reconstruct the barn exactly as it existed, using original plans, historic photographs, and salvaged materials wherever possible. Every cost, labor permits, inspections, environmental remediation came out of the association's reserve funds. No insurance, no shortcuts. And one more thing, a permanent restriction was recorded in the county registry. The HOA would never again claim authority over my land, nor over any agricultural property bordering there. Development. That restriction would follow them forever. When the first construction truck arrived, it stopped at my gate and waited. The foreman didn't get out until I waved him in. That alone told me everything had changed. I stood nearby as crews unloaded beams reclaimed from the demolished wreckage. Some were cracked, some scarred, some blackened from decades of use. I ran my hand along one of them, feeling grooves my father's tools had carved into the wood long before I was born. They didn't replace those beams. They reinforced them. Strength didn't come from erasing history. It came from respecting it. Day by day, the frame rose, not rushed, not cheap, inspected twice as often as required. County officials visited regularly, checking off compliance with quiet satisfaction. This time, nothing was assumed. Everything was earned. Linda Prescott never came. None of the former board members did. They sent representatives, attorneys, contractors, people who knew how to follow instructions without opinions. I didn't need apologies. The land didn't either. When the roof went on, I climbed a ladder myself and stood inside the skeleton of the barn, sunlight filtering through open beams. For a moment, I could almost hear my father's voice telling me to measure twice, to square the corners, to never rush what was meant to last. The final inspection passed without comment. The barn stood again, same footprint, same dimensions, same orientation toward the sunrise. But it wasn't the same barn. It was stronger. I hung my father's old American flag inside, just as it had always been. I placed his letters in a sealed cedar box on the loft beam, protected now from dust, time, and other people's arrogance. On the outside, facing the HOA entrance, I added one thing, a simple sign. No decoration, no aggression, private property protected by LAW. The day it went up, HOA residents slowed as they drove past. Some nodded, some looked away, none stopped. Weeks passed, then months. The HOA rebuilt its board from scratch. Under county oversight, their rules changed. Their enforcement softened. Fines dropped. Inspections became requests instead of demands. Word spread. Other landowners, quiet ones, older ones, started asking questions, pushing back, requesting documentation. The balance had shifted. One evening, as the sun sank low in gold, I sat on the barn steps with a cup of coffee, watching dust drift lazily across the field. The land felt whole, again not untouched, but honored. Marcus called. They settled the last claim. He said, "That's it, good," I replied. "You okay?" I looked around. The barn, the fence line, the open sky. "Yeah," I said. "I am the HOA. Never apologized publicly. They didn't have to. Their silence said enough. They learned what happens when power forgets its limits. And I learned something too, that coming home isn't about reclaiming what you've lost. It's about deciding what you refuse to let be taken again." Barn stood steady against the wind. So did I.